Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar in our ongoing webinar series where we talk to experts around the industry and manufacturing. And today we have a hot topic called Tariff-ied, right? How do we turn uncertainty into agility? And so we all know the difficult news. Tariff policies are creating uncertainty everywhere across every industry, but in manufacturing specifically, it's really turning up the heat on our existing production, on demand, on the supply chain. And it's also exposing some of the underlying challenges that we have with skilled labor, with digital, AI driven transformation, with reshoring, nearshoring, operational excellence, and a host of other things. But the good news is that the industry is no stranger to operating in a crisis. And many of the AI tools and strategies that we have already deployed can give us an operational advantage. So today, we'd like to move past the news cycle and to focus on actions that can help manufacturers stay agile. And we'll be speaking with a panel of industry experts about some of the key implications and some of the key strategies for manufacturing. And today, I'm really proud to have with us really great panelists, really great speakers, and people really with deep industry expertise. So we have Alvaro Cuba. Please say hi.
Hello,
Um,
guys. How are you? Pleasure to be here.
so Alvaro is a strategic supply chain consultant. He's also former senior vice president of supply chain at Mondelez and a number of other large enterprises. We also have Fred Wasden. Hi, Fred.
Morning.
Fred is an accomplished engineer in the oil and gas space. He's also a consultant. He's retired from Shell. And we also have Terry Ledoux, former
Everyone.
VP. Hi, Terry. Former VP of Nestle Purina North America. And he also is a digital manufacturing expert, working with a number of companies and enterprises. And you also have myself, Artem Krupinov, VP of Strategy at Augury. So welcome, everyone. Let's kick this off. First of all, I wanted to ask more of a broad strategic question. We have had crises before in the industry. And when we talk about the industry, it's not just US or North American based manufacturing, it's global, right? And this is a memory that's just from a few years ago with the pandemic. So we've had significant disruptions, we've had challenges across the board. And I'd like to ask all of you, are there any similarities and maybe what are some of the key differences between the previous crisis that we've had with the pandemic, COVID, and the crisis that might happen today?
So I think there's some key differences, right? During COVID, every country was able to push money into their economies to support the economic downturn that was caused by COVID. This was different, right? Especially for some countries, right? You have inflationary pressures that are going to be driven by tariffs between countries. You have, with that high prices coming forward, now it's going to drive inflationary pressures. Demand's going to drop. You may see a condition of high inflation and high unemployment. And that puts all countries in a tough spot because if you inject more money into your economy, print money, it just drives more inflation, right? So you get into a scenario of stagflation similar to the 1970s.
Interesting. So I mean, and there's a lot of talk, obviously, about potentially this causing a recession, right? And at least in some
Right.
countries, and disrupting global trade. The IMF just downgraded global growth, I think today, projections and so forth. So this is definitely daunting for manufacturers. Alvaro, what do you think?
Yeah, before that, I also wanted to remind you in 2018 and 19, we had some similar crisis, specifically on tariffs. No, we put tariffs to Canada and Mexico and Europe and China. And it's a long process, no? Because you put the tariffs and then comes negotiations, and every time there is negotiations, the situation changes, and you need to be constantly working on adjusting to that. But to Terry's point, this is broad, and uncertainty, which is what is the primary thing that happens. It happens in all levels, not only at the country level, but employees, suppliers, customers, everyone becomes very uncertain, and part of the leadership challenge is how you reassure and how you keep everyone focused in these important times to stay with the eyes on the ball.
Do you see, I mean, previously, obviously, companies took time to reassess what's happening, right? And kind of paused a lot of different things, create some strategies that they can have a backup plan, right? Or multiple scenarios. Maybe, Fred or anyone else, how do you see manufacturers reacting right now to this situation?
Let me just add a perspective from the energy business. As you mentioned, Artem, this is not the first crisis that we've faced, and in the energy space, the primary driver is the price of the product, which is forecast actually to go down dramatically. We're currently sitting at an oil price of, let's say, 60 to 65. I've seen some of the banks predict 40 within the next year. So from a investment perspective, these companies don't look to be throwing off a lot of free cash flow in the near term. So couple that with potential tariffs on some basic material steel, and you start to see a dramatic shift in strategy and a very quick shift in strategy toward focusing on those activities that don't require CapEx and don't require, buying big things. So I'm constantly getting pinged on new ideas on reducing operating expense. And of course, operating expense has many components, but maintenance is one that's often very, very visible. It's easier to track than some of the other elements. Again, borrowing from a playbook that's been, I think, well tested in previous events, I'm seeing a repeat of some of those strategies and tactics. I think the difference this time around is that the technology has changed to the point where the technology will enable people to make some better decisions as they drill into their operating expenses and really challenge where can we take some cost out without messing up our operations, increasing our overall risk profile, and so forth. The thing that I think is different this time is just the level of uncertainty day to day. It is something that I haven't seen for quite some time, and I spend a good bit of my time scratching my head, to be blunt.
No, that's interesting. So the similarity there is that demand is also low, right? For energy product, we're potentially going to get lower. So some of the same tools apply, but uncertainty seems to be even higher, which is also very interesting. So let me, Fred, let me stay with you and kind of ask more of a strategy question. In the energy space, in the oil and gas space, do you see the exemptions that we have for some of the tariffs affecting strategy? Right? Because we know that some of these energy products are actually exempt from tariffs and may remain so in the near future.
That is helpful. I would counter that with, again, people are not sure how long those exemptions will stay in place. And many of the capital decisions, the CapEx decisions, are based on a forward view on price, not what is in place for the next 90 days. I think it's that element, Artem, that is really difficult to manage right now. We kind of have a clear line of sight to maybe the next 90 days, maybe the next 180 days, hard to tell. if I start spending CapEx, I'm spending it with the idea of, things coming on stream in 2 to 3 years. And that's the part that's very, very hazy at the moment. If we're in a global recession, and that's being predicted more and more. So it's the time lag in the energy space on the CapEx. Now, OpEx, different story. As we all know, there are smart dollars to spend today that can turn into real savings in a matter of weeks or months.
Yeah, for sure. The times of uncertainty we have, it kind of kills long-term planning, right? Or at least it puts a pause on the long-term plans, and you kind of go shorter terms, and that's where CapEx comes in versus OpEx. And I just wanted to ask Terry, really, how does that play? Short-term, long-term. We have longer-term digital transformation, fusion of AI into kind of corporate strategy for manufacturers. How do short-term tariff responses really interact with these longer-term digital transformation plans for manufacturers?
Honestly, accelerates a lot of the digital transformation, right? To Fred's point, there are many things you can do with OpEx right now, and digital transformation is one of those. So if you think about the predictive technologies in the maintenance space, if predictive in the process health space, knowledge assistance or agentic AI, and in general, anything on that connected worker space also. I mean, these are rapid implementations for the most part that have paybacks in the 90 to 180 day period that Fred was talking about. And many companies are moving forward with those. So I truly believe it's going to accelerate things, not slow them down, because they're not huge investments, right? I'm not going to put in a new line. I'm not going to build a new factory. These are things I can do in 90 to 180 days.
Right. So these are kind of rather quick, primarily OpEx based additions, and you get quick ROI, but does it also, are these kind of distractions from the longer term strategy, or are they also the core part of the longer term strategy as you implement them?
It's kind of core to it, especially with where we are in trying to secure manufacturing labor, right? So as we implement the digital transformation, more automation will actually be implemented. And that's really the long term, right? I've never seen so many ASRSs, extremely expensive warehousing solutions in the $50 to $60 million base. But those are moving forward. And they're not moving forward because everybody wants an ASRS. They're moving forward because we can't find the labor to work on our warehouses.
Well, that's very interesting. So, we kind of talked about manufacturing and optimization of manufacturing given the uncertainty, but maybe, Alvaro, you can give more of a supply chain perspective, right? How do companies in the industrial manufacturing space reposition themselves and their supply chains given this uncertainty with tariffs?
Well, I would say you have two pieces to that. No, one is the operational. You need to react quickly. You need to reduce the cost. Your demand is going to change, so you need to be agile to keep product on the shelf, which is the most important part. And you need to reduce cash so you can put it in when you need. So in that short term, everything about operational excellence and quick implementations. We were talking now about the new technologies and AI that it's helping to turn things around in 180 days or less, with huge returns. So looking efficiency, service, inventories, that's one play. The other play is the strategic play, which is a little bit more challenging because it changes from where you have your raw and pack. Every country is going to be changing their prices for raw and pack. Your finished goods, you need to decide, you reshore, you change from one country to the other, and everything is in that. But that's not defined, because part of the tariff uncertainty is that you put the tariffs, the other country reacts, and then you negotiate, and it's changing all the time. So in the strategic part, whatever keeps you nimble, agile, it's better. That you can make decisions and take it, and again, technology, especially for the planning, it's helping significantly. Huge amount of data and changing all the time. That's the sweet spot for AI, and it can at least give you the visibility, but strategically, ideally, you need to have different things in play so you can move from one to the other depending on how this ends up playing out.
So thank you for that. I think between the three of you, we kind of hit on some of the core elements, right? Core implications, maybe strategies. So to tease out what are the some of the core elements, we talked about operational excellence, right? Also short term versus long term. We talked briefly about skill set, productivity. We talked about people, operations, and we also talked about supply chain planning and strategy. So I think we'll kind of talk about those three sections now, and we'll start with operational excellence. And Terry, back to you. I'd like to ask you about some of the approaches, specific approaches that you took at Nestle in the past that were most helpful in these types of periods of uncertainty.
One of the things that we focused on, and I'll use 2018, 2019, because that's when we started our journey. We focused on people at the center of the digital transformation and what's going to enhance their performance and their engagement in the mission that manufacturing has. So we focused heavily on connected worker. We focused heavily on predictive tools that information from the machines are coming to them with prescriptions to say, hey, maybe you need to do a center line. Maybe you need to go over here and check this structural connection to make sure we're okay. And we just kept moving forward with that. So mobilizing your workforce, bringing the information to them was one of the biggest steps we made. And it was a dramatic step that drove productivity considerably for our business at that time, right before COVID and during COVID. It really helped us be agile to respond to the market conditions that existed at that time.
So the outcome of those was mostly agility. Were you, if you remember that time, were you capacity constrained?
Yes, we were heavily capacity constrained. So having a connected workforce that could see across the entire factory and they're all seeing the same thing, whether we're winning or losing on that day, it really helped our OpEx and our productivity and enabled us to get more product into the marketplace when we were physically capacity constrained. So it was just an enormous lever that we were able to pull and do it in a 3 to 12 month time frame across 15 factory sites.
Yeah, we saw that with a number of our partners, that not only did they implement some of these capabilities and technologies, they also used that as an opportunity to kind of accelerate their digital roadmap and push some of these initiatives through. Fred, I'd like to get your perspective on the same thing, operational excellence, some of the initiatives that were really helpful last time we had a crisis like this.
Well, I'll build a little bit on some of the other comments. Many of us on the call are familiar with the age-old cut and cope strategy when it comes to reducing operating expense, in particular maintenance. When I reflect on how things are changing, to be blunt, in the past, oftentimes when we did the cut and cope, we just hoped we weren't overlooking something. And we hoped that by doing X, we weren't inadvertently causing a long-term or short-term problem. What's changed now is that there is a growing acceptance of the value of predictive maintenance. Many people have been doing it for years without really knowing what it could do, and I'm seeing that becoming part of the core work process, even to the point of one of the producers I was talking to not long ago. They had turned some AI loose on predicting which spare parts they should be stocking up on now based on the rates of failure, the countries of origin, and some indication of the robustness of the supply chain. And that's a level of sophistication that is new, and I think is going to enable this cut and cope to not make a mess of the business. And people, many of us have been on the action side of cut and cope, and you've always got sort of an uncomfortable feeling when you start down that path. Some of the new tools, call it AI, call it machine learning, call it predictive, that's really helping to make people feel more confident that they can take those actions.
Yeah, we see depending on the industry, of course. If you have a really asset intensive industry like oil and gas, obviously the assets and their spare parts are really core, and that's true for any manufacturing industry. But people often overlook the supply chain of the spare parts, right? And only to find out that they're going to be down for 8 weeks because it has to be shipped from somewhere, and it's twice as expensive and so forth. So yeah, and definitely at Augury, that's something that we're help some of our customers achieve as well, as get that level of visibility. Shifting from that a little bit more into the idea of cutting costs and operational excellence, right? This is, for some manufacturers today, they're not going to be capacity constrained. They're going to have less demand, right? And so they have to shift into a situation where they really need to figure out how to get their margins right, and make sure that they stay lean until this clears out. So Alvaro, maybe you can give some perspective on that.
Yeah. Operational excellence in CPG, operational excellence is many, many years, is forever, with good or bad and bad results. But now with the new technology that we are talking here, it's reloaded. TPM, lean, CI, reloaded. And that gives you tremendous advantage, And the advantage of that is, when you go into it, you can touch many things at the same time. For instance, a critical pillar of operational excellence is quality. And now you can apply all this technology to quality. But as soon as you improve your quality and start getting to right first time, then you reduce cost, because you don't have waste, you don't have to do reprocessing. You improve the reliability of your line, and then you can reduce stocks. You don't need so many stocks, because now your line is more reliable. And you are also more predictive in your entire line, which helps service. So that's the beauty. When you go in that, you can hit the three of them. Another example is, and you were talking about stocks and the uncertainty. Now with the new technology, you can turn, instead of forecast, go to replenishment. And if you do that, you help the entire supply chain, because your suppliers know better what you need for when, spare parts, what you can produce. And that has ripple effects and benefits in cost, service, and cash at the same time, or process efficiency. So I think that's where we need to focus very quickly now, and with that holistic approach. You go, now you have the culture, which is the TPM or lean or whatever. Now you have the technological tools, and you can just jump start. And that's with this holistic approach, that I have to get the benefits in the tree. Plus people, you were talking about people, which is safety, from that perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, we definitely see this kind of rising tide lifts all boats kind of mentality, and it's very real. Once a company has really deep insight into what's happening operationally, what's happening in terms of their excellence programs, what's happening with their supply chain, and it's digitized, they have insights in real time, then they can apply that same level of rigor to their suppliers, right? And often the opposite is also true, where you don't exactly know what is happening, what are the root causes of your downtime, what's constraining you, and you're struggling to get these operational programs across. You cannot, I mean, it's very difficult for you to then predict and be able to tell your suppliers how you would like them to behave going forward. So
and you can tell your suppliers, you can tell your customers, and you can tell your own people.
That's right. It's kind of that level of visibility becomes the core of planning, right? And agility.
Yes.
So we mentioned people, so let's switch over to talk about people, because that's critical. We are severely, based on, and without going too much into kind of political projections, but we are seeing a disruption of global supply chains, and a large part of it is geopolitically driven, right? We're seeing realignments. We're seeing kind of some scenarios where we have different camps, like back in the old Soviet Cold War days, where you had completely separated supply chains across the world. So without projecting too much into that kind of future, we're definitely seeing elements of that happening right now, and obviously that's putting a lot of pressure on countries to have manufacturing in-house and have their own supply chain kind of secured in-house in terms of raw materials and parts and whatnot, and across the trade alliances. So here we're seeing a disruption, and also kind of an elevation of the need to be able to onshore, reshore, friendshore, in any way you want to call that. And that highlights the need for skilled people to be able to manufacture goods, right? And so, maybe Terry, we'll start with you. How do you see this playing out? If we do have a massive pool for nearshoring, reshoring, but we have a very small number of people who can actually, work in manufacturing today. How do you see that playing out in the future? What can help in that aspect?
Yeah, so there's a common misconception around manufacturing that it's a dirty environment to work in, it's monotonous, all of those things, which actually isn't true today in modern manufacturing. These are highly skilled people that, whether they're running the lines as a technical operator or they're a maintenance tech, that supports the reliability of the line. And then how do you bring them up to speed very quickly? And once again, because of, during COVID, we had a mass level of retirements, just because of the fear of being at work. I'm older, I've been at the company 40 years. So we had to turn to digital once again. We had to find those digital tools that would lighten the load, and allow people to learn faster, more quickly. And some of that is, instead of 40 hours in a classroom, right? If I have 40 hours in a classroom, I go back out on the floor, how much do I really remember? So we kind of had to put that mobile environment and that YouTube for manufacturing. They can call up whatever they need when they need it right there to just reinforce the training they've had. And that's helped a lot, right? So it used to take 9 months to onboard a new manufacturing associate. So that's getting down to 5 months now. Well, once again, it's harnessing the power of the people that are already there, that have that knowledge, them inputting that into a digital tool that can be shared across multiple sites globally. So it is, once again, it's leveraging digital and leveraging the knowledge you have to bring those people up to speed faster.
So that's in a way that's also creating new capabilities, right? So we can manufacture more things. but it also, I think, comes down to productivity, right? If the cost to manufacture per person, or the cost of labor per person in let's say China or another country in South Asia is a third of what it is in the US, that means then to be able to reach the same level of capabilities, you have to have productivity that's 2 or 3 times more per person, right? And that's just
correct.
to reach the same level of capabilities. But we actually want to go beyond that and expand manufacturing capabilities in the West. So, Fred, maybe you can give a perspective on that as well. How's productivity related to technology, and how has it evolved in recent years, especially in the energy space?
It's interesting, Artem. Even though I sort of advertise myself as a technical consultant, I spend at least 3/4 of my time on change management. And here recently, I was working with a client, and the bottom line of the conversation is they didn't have a technology problem, they had a leadership problem. What we're finding is that the consumer electronics becomes a leveling influence. We're all comfortable with using our mobile devices to do all kinds of things. And so our ability to get the most productivity from a wide variety of people with different backgrounds, different different personalities, frankly, starts to hinge on that interface with the screen. And I'm seeing a lot of emphasis being put on, I hate to use the word because it's a buzzword, but gamification.
Mm-hmm.
Back to Terry's comment, if you can take some of these skilling models and turn them into games, people across the spectrum will resonate with that, and you'll see very quick uptake of those skills. And that's a real change. Gone are the days of going away for a 5-day training course. Oftentimes, training now takes an hour with repeated check-ins. What I'm seeing is that allows you to introduce new technologies into the production environment much more quickly. And you couple that with the fact that I think increasingly people are less afraid of words like AI, machine learning, things of that nature, and they're at least curious. Here recently, I was in a meeting and I asked how many people had Chat GPT on their phones, and these were operations types, and nearly all did.
Mm-hmm.
That is huge. When we start to remove those internal emotional barriers to some of these buzzwords, then as an industry, we can start to take advantage of them throughout the production process. And that's really the biggest change I'm seeing is we've just moved on and we're accepting of these technologies in a very basic human way.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very similar experience, by the way. It was at a conference, and I said, show of hands, who is afraid of, AI taking their job? This was a manufacturing conference with engineers, primarily plant managers and so forth. But there were a few data scientists there. And so the only people who raised their hands to the question, who's afraid of AI taking their jobs, were the data scientists, which is very interesting, right? It's I think that it's very clear that for what it's worth, AI and digital capabilities manufacturers are not going to make us less productive. Okay, they're going to make us more productive. But I think there are still some gaps and barriers to that adoption. And I'm not talking about forced, kind of enforcing adoption and forcing people to adopt, but rather what's kind of the most organic way we can actually do that and do that really quickly. And maybe Alvaro, you have some insights. How do we approach that training capability and supporting our workers?
Yeah, just you were talking about productivity. We have done a lot of manufacturing with automating lines and cobots, and now with TPM and AI lines running almost alone. And still, according to the Labor Department, today we have $500,000 people gap in manufacturing. And in the next 5 years, that will multiply by 5. So we have to do something to attract more people from the other sectors, from the service sector or the others. And one is perception, and Terry was talking about perception, and help change the perception. The other is training, how we train them fast and how they move them fast. And again, technology, Twin Towers, for instance. Now you have the Twin Towers. You can train them in the Twin Tower in 1/3 or 20% of the time that you used before. You can now put them in the line much faster because you were talking, guys, about ChatGPT. There is now the AI coach for the operator. And the operator in their mobile or their monitor is receiving constant insights and actions and things to do. So it's completely different than the concept of training that we had in the past. Now, and the new generations, they are tech savvies and they come eager to that. I think we can use that to attract more people. If they can see themselves managing the line with their monitors and making decisions in real time and insights versus just moving cases or intervening in the line, then it changed completely even the kind of work. It's not the repetitive work, but it becomes a career in tech somehow. And I think we need to move. We have done a lot, but I think we need to do more to try to show that and attract people. Otherwise, this gap will continue to grow, and then it becomes really a challenge, especially now that with tariffs we are talking about reshoring or all those things. So, yeah, those are some areas that we can work.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I don't have as much time in factories as any of you. But even just a few years ago, walk into a factory, and in last year, you visited some of our customers. It's a completely different experience, and you see, you kind of see the lines between service or knowledge work and what we have operational work in the factory blurring. So when we think about manufacturing and we think about controls, running operations, obviously there are a lot of skills that are still required where you have to you do have to turn a wrench, you have to physically fix a machine and so forth. But when we talk about the majority of operational engineering roles, they're not different fundamentally in terms of kind of like how you approach work, what interfaces you're using than software engineering or some other fields of engineering that you have in this manufacturing environment. And it's highly sophisticated. It's a really rewarding environment to work in, and you're solving some really, really big, very practical problems, day to day. So I think that perception absolutely has to change. That the perception of manufacturing is dirty, it's dated, and so forth. That's just simply not the case anymore for the majority of manufacturers. But let's go back to this idea of how do we plan to not just change that perception quickly, but also in light of tariffs, how do we adjust our operations, our supply chain planning, this idea of capex and OpEx to make some changes today that are going to be impactful in the short term, but also in the long term, right? So maybe Alvaro, you can stay with you, and what do you think is going to be most effective now for some of the companies to navigate these changes?
Well, as we discussed, these changes are massive, which means huge amount of data, because everything is going to be changing, no? Outside, inside, every supplier, and will continue to change. So having visibility and whatever gives you visibility and insights for decision making, it works. And we were talking about using technology and AI into the planning space, you know? And right now, you really have applications where you can use it for demand planning, no, as changing forecast for replenishment, which makes a huge difference. In your supply planning, in your raw and pack material, everything is going to be moving, and you also need to think about hedging currency or future buying. All of that depends on the visibility that you have, no? And right now you have software AI that it helps you to keep track, even gives you forecasts of pricing of raw and pack, and monitor what's happening in every country with every supplier at the same time, no? So again, massive data and require that visibility. If you put those two, no, what's coming in and what your consumers are demanding, then you can plan the middle accordingly and in an efficient way, no? In the most efficient way for your plants to be more productive. No? So I would say that should be the focus. And it's not only for this crisis, no? Every crisis brings uncertainty and all that. So everything you will do in that space will give you very quick results, but it's building your strategic capability to win in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, data is huge, right? And hugely important to be able to do that and get the right insight for that. But we also mentioned this idea that, you know, CapEx versus OpEx, where OpEx is more of a shorter term tool, right? But that one that can yield great long-term results, you know, and agility in a period of uncertainty. So, you know, Fred, Terry, you know, what are some of the OpEx-based investments that manufacturers can make today that are going to be the most impactful?
Why don't you go ahead, Terry?
Well, one, it is in your digital transformation. So if you don't have this visibility or insights today, this is the first lever you need to pull. Because to Alvaro's point, when you have this, you see that what was once a very siloed organization, you know, manufacturing, transportation, warehousing, ops, you know, planning, sales, marketing, it comes closer. It becomes more of a hive mindset. Everything operates in concert because we all see the same thing. So if you don't have that today, then you're already behind, right? For, you know, and it's an enormous OpEx lever from cost efficiencies, and even more so agility, right? So if you think about a hive, you know, bees don't truly predict the weather; they kind of react to the weather, right? And then that's the kind of the situation we're in, right? We don't know what next week or next month looks like. There could be news tomorrow that changes where we need to move, but you need to move in concert. Everyone's got to move together to be successful. So having that visibility, that transparency, all the way to the factory floor, right? You know, the biggest benefit we can offer to the future workforce in the manufacturing space is they get to emotionally participate in what we do as manufacturers, right? What we deliver to our consumers, how we make it better every day. Can't do that without that digital platform that gives them the insights and the visibility, the gamification, right? To physically participate in that process.
Yeah, and we mentioned previously some of the kind of key use cases that are, you know, already proving a tremendous amount of return and are kind of are rather simple and fast to implement. We talked about obviously prescriptive maintenance, talked about optimizing process, connected worker, and others, and supply chain planning, right? Kind of capabilities, and they all tie together in some way. Maybe we can just go quickly around, Fred, Terry, Alvaro, among the different use cases that you see, to be just a bit more practical. If you're looking at, a manufacturing operation across the different segments, which ones, if they don't have them implemented right now, which ones do you think they should implement and move quickly on in the next few months?
Yeah, so thanks, Artem. As we had this discussion, I'm reminded of the old saying, "Never waste a good crisis." And what I'm hearing is that this environment that we're in right now is a good opportunity to really embed some of the new ways of working that are based on having this open digital kind of warehouse, if you will. Once you have that in place, I'm seeing a move toward, I would call it an expansion of some consumer goods. And so an example of that is there's a little startup in Silicon Valley that's basically taken the guts from the Amazon truck shipping algorithms and married that with some predictive maintenance kind of algorithms, and is providing the field operators with an optimized route such that when they turn up in the morning, they go to A, B, C, and D in order of return on investment. Now, it's coming to them from their mobile device, so that's comfortable. They are aligned with the idea of doing good work that matters, back to the previous points. And the cost of this was very, very small because it built on existing consumer applications. I've even seen, and this is almost trivial, but in the offshore environment, people wearing these rings that measure your biostatistics. And there are discussions, and this gets into the privacy realm, but it's coming, where people would start to predict whether person X should be out working on a machine, given those statistics. Now, some people think, boy, that sounds like Big Brother. I would argue that we all want to work in a safe environment, and we certainly wouldn't want to hurt ourselves or someone else. This is building on technology that's been under development for quite some time. Very small outlays. Each industry now has the opportunity to take some of those technologies and sort of customize them for their particular use cases. Again, anything to do with making rotating equipment work better for longer periods, the payoff is almost instantaneous. And we've pretty much covered the fleet now. We're not finding many rotating things that haven't been covered with some at least vibration analysis. Let me put that. Let me say that.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Alvaro?
I would say right now the top two is we talk about the planning capabilities, and because it gives you the visibility of the end-to-end and the possibility to react quickly. And nowadays our AI softwares for anyone you need more, no? So you have to see your planning end-to-end and say which one, and you will find one to go after. That's the overarching. And I would say the second, I will concur with Fred, it's how make your line to work better. No, the machine health, and even if you can go into process health, it's ideal. And it's not only helpful for the production, but we were talking about the big impact on people, on safety, engagement, and all that, and also to attract the people that we need, which I think will become the biggest problem that we'll have in the next years, how to have the people to run the lines.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Terry.
Yeah, so if I had to start right in a manufacturing environment, the first two would be, first would be connected worker, and I say that because you have to, make people mobile and comfortable with the technology. Immediately follow with machine health. These are two that you can do in 90 days each that provide immediate return to your bottom line. After that, I would follow with a self upskilling tool on how you're going to increase your knowledge base inside your factory, followed by process health. So the first three enable your operators to have the visibility, the insight that you need for process health to work. Process health is harder. It's very specific to your manufacturing environment. And then I would follow that with some of the new AI tools, which have been mentioned, knowledge assistants, AI coaches, agentic AI, and always keep people at the center of this, right? I mean, we'll continue to automate, but we always have to do this with fewer people, right? So, getting more out of the equipment is really dependent about enabling your manufacturing people to be able to manage more equipment in their span of control. And technology allows us to do that.
Yeah, well hopefully, manufacturers will not waste this crisis and really embrace and start building, really rapidly building that future environment where people are a lot more productive. They have the tools to be skilled. It's a lot more of an attractive industry to work in terms of perception, and we can eventually increase our capacity and handle these types of crises with a lot more agility, a lot more capabilities. That's what I'm hopeful for, right? We have some of the core technologies in place. We have some incredibly bright people in manufacturing that can really innovate in this space. So that is what makes me optimistic about manufacturing and our future, even in light of this type of crisis. What makes you optimistic? Alvaro, go ahead.
I think all these crises make us stronger, more agile, and I still have seen companies, clients that I have there, we're in the decision-making process. No, should I go to technology? Should I? How? I think this helps you to push. And one of the things that with this new technology, in the past, you were thinking, oh, I need to make a change. I need to plan. I need to invest. I need capital. I need approvals. No, it was very complex. With the new technology, it's so simple. No, you just pick the technology. You don't need capital because it's OpEx. It's just pay as you do. It comes and implements in weeks, and you have the results in 3 months, and you pay with the savings that you are getting in your plant. No, so it almost becomes as a no-brainer, and I can do it quick. And if I get wrong because it was the wrong provider or the wrong solution, my investment was minimum. I quickly can rotate and go. So it gives me optimism, the fact that now all these processes that we have been talking for many, many years can become very practical and very quickly applications in the shop floor. And this crisis help us to just jump into it, and start to reap the benefits.
Yeah, and we're kind of just for the audience, we're already have kind of shifted towards the Q&A section. When I started to ask the question about optimism, and this is relevant. I'm seeing questions here. One of them is, how do you convince your senior leadership to think beyond the short-term horizon? When we have all these long-term issues of machine center failure, obsolescence, and so forth. I think that ties really nicely to the question of optimism and a lot of things that we discussed, because sometimes the short-term solution is also the foundation for the long-term solution and provides a result. That's the beauty of some of these kind of like fast-paying, fast return investment AI capabilities. So that's just to answer that question, but we want to give your perspective on what makes you optimistic, and what are some of the core capabilities that we already have or can implement quickly to drive that optimism. So Terry, I think you raised your hand earlier.
Yeah, I once again, I believe in people, right? We're behind the technology. We choose what technology we're going to use, what technology we're going to create. And no matter how you look at it, it is human nature to progress. All crisis aside, every crisis creates opportunity, and we come out better on the other side of it in the long term. So I believe in that still, that I don't think that's going to change historically. And to Ryan's question, those long-term investments, these crises, guess what? Every company out there is, in that short-term mode, thinking like you are. They're uncertain whether they should invest or not in that obsolescence. But now's the time really to plan to invest in that obsolescence. Know exactly when we come out of this, will you be behind or ahead of your competitor? So I really think, everyone has to have multiple plans that look at those longer term investments. Which triggers will you pull as we know more about this short term crisis, as we want to call it, right? And good companies are doing that. They have 3, 4, 5 different avenues. They're like, if this happens, we're going this way, right? So I still think you have to prepare. And long term is, we will continue to make investment in equipment. It's just a matter of when we're going to pull that trigger and which trigger will we pull.
Great. Thank you. So I think we're almost at time, right? So Fred, let me ask the same question. What makes you optimistic before we wrap up?
Yeah, thanks, Artem. And I would echo both Terry and Alvaro's comments there. I'm a naturally optimistic person. I guess what makes me particularly optimistic is I'm seeing a number of the sort of barriers that were thrown up 2, 3, 4 years ago disappearing. There was always a big fuss about data privacy. We can't do this because our data is, that's been managed pretty well. That's one example. We can't do this because, we'll have to buy everybody an iPad. Well, guess what? Those are now, they round to zero in cost. So I'm optimistic because it seems like some of the arguments that I had when I was with big oil company, we don't have to have those arguments anymore. And so we can really move forward together. That's why I'm optimistic.
That's great. Well, I want to thank all of you for having such an insightful discussion. I certainly learned a lot, and hopefully, people who have joined have learned as well. And wish you a great rest of your week. Thank you for joining, and thanks for everyone in the audience for joining us as well.
Thanks.